This episode is made possible by NetSuite by Oracle and Brex, the AI-powered spend platform.
Hi, this is Amberine Tubasi, CFO of Airtable, and you are listening to the CFO Thought Leaders podcast.
This is episode 1013.
At the core of it, Relativity is just a next generation launch company. And so we're building a rocket that's about 40-50% larger than Falcon 9, which inarguably is the most successful commercial rocket that SpaceX has done. Really going to take up satellites for customers up into orbit. We've done a smaller rocket, took it up to space, which was one of the most successful first launches ever for anybody, and have built a multi-billion-dollar backlog of launch agreements. And we're working on a larger rocket that I mentioned that will launch in 2026 and quickly ramp from there.
Hi, it's Jack. On today's episode, we speak with Mo Shahzad, CFO of Relativity Space. Mo Shahzad is not one for trivial conversations. At Relativity Space, he's known for his deep curiosity, often engaging team members in discussions about their interests, their passions. This intellectual curiosity is not just a personal trait. It's a vital tool for his role as CFO. Shahzad's ability to connect on a personal level mirrors his professional mission, translating the innovative dreams of Relativity Space's founders into a compelling narrative for investors and all future stakeholders. You'll hear that story and much more on today's episode. We'll begin after this. CFOs and controllers, does expense management feel like a necessary evil? It's time to switch to Brex. Brex automates and accelerates spend management with easy-to-use corporate cards, travel, expense management, and bill pay, all on one AI-powered platform. Brex makes it easy to boost efficiency and compliance enterprise-wide and free up your managers, employees, and accounting team for higher impact work. Top companies from startups to enterprises are using Brex to automate manual work and transform their finance operations. We're talking DoorDash, Robinhood, Airtable, and countless other industry leaders. Ready to join them? Switch to AI-powered spend management at Brex.com. And hello, we're speaking to Mo Shahzad, CFO of Relativity Space. Mo, welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
So, Mo, we're going to begin by asking you to look back, and what we're interested in are those experiences you feel prepared you for the role, best prepared you for the role. You've had many, many experiences, and we don't have enough time, most likely. But what comes to mind?
Yeah, I think, Jack, lots of things over time. And I'm a big believer in all of the little experiences one has in their life is what ultimately prepares them. And so it's everything from my childhood, growing up, to a father who was a small business entrepreneur and thinking about how to build and run a business where you really need to bring in more cash, today than you got to pay out tomorrow, and having that real ownership mentality, to having moved to the United States when I was in the middle of high school, and the resilience that you have to build when you're dealing with American high school kids, when you have a thick South Asian accent, to experiences in college, of course, and the variety of different things I've done in my life, from consulting to operating roles, to investment banking, and how to sort of learn really the rough way how to work 100 hours a week, constantly selling companies, equity stories, debt stories. And then an amazing boss I had ultimately in the first CFO nod that I got about 8 years ago, who really was the best boss, and coach at that time in my career that I've ever had, and really helped me see what the CFO role is all about. And this is my second stint now, but I'd say, yeah, a long answer to your question, but it's all the strings of experiences over time that have brought me to this point.
Nice overview for us. First of all, I want to return to the dining room table in high school. The original business concepts that you began to grasp was cash management, I have a sense, as like any entrepreneur. But anything else you can recall from that time when you began to learn about what it was to run a business or operate a business, knowing that your father had a lot on his mind, certain mites? Yeah.
Yeah, I think a number of things I could say about that, Jack. I guess the first thing I'd say is, which can be dangerous in today's world, but never really understood where the lines between personal and work, stopped. And so you were always either working or you were thinking about work. And some of the greatest ideas weren't going to come, sitting in an office setting like between the hours of 9 and 5. They were going to come as you were being creative and really thinking about work. So that's sort of, I think, one big theme of my life, and how it all sort of blends. And wherever I am, I'm sort of constantly thinking about work. Now, of course, I have 3 little kids, and so I'm not always thinking about work. I'd like to believe I'm not, but I think that's super important, the work ethic that comes with a full out sort of dedication. And that's hands down something I've learned from my father, who's, by the way, in his 70s and started, his gazillionth business at this point, and is still at it. Right. I think the other thing I'd say really is this like ownership mentality. My father, for most things he did, certainly not till much later in his life, did he ever like raise money from the outside or use other people's money. And it was always this like, okay, like whatever I got to build for myself or my partner or two that he had along the way. And so it was never about a role or a title or any other sort of type of satisfaction than a mere, drive to just like have the company be successful. And I think keeping that lens, whether you're in a one-on-one or whether you're in a team meeting or you're running a scaled business in a management setting or you're in front of the whole company and in all hands, like you have got to walk that talk. You've got to have that reputation. You've just got to act that way on trying to drive the company. So those are some of the sort of lessons, of course, at that time, sitting around a dinner table as a elementary school kid, weren't exactly being absorbed in the same way, but that's sort of the behavior I learned and hope to model and believe I'm modeling in my own life.
It was always going to, I think, and I think business school played an important role for you. I can see it in your bio that you have 5 years before business school, and then 5 years at Goldman Sachs. I mean, that might say a lot right there.
Yeah, I mean, I'd say, business school, and there's no right or wrong answer for this for many in their careers. Ultimately, it's you get out of business school what you put into it. For me, I would characterize the 5 years prior to business school as a lost, soul trying to figure out what I really wanted to do. And I'd spent some time in consulting, and I'd had an operating role at a large company and done the Wall Street thing. I had started my own business at the ripe age of my early 20s. It was a mobile advertising company, and I really wasn't exactly sure what I wanted to do. And so business school, which I actually started in a JD MBA program, ultimately dropped the law school part of it. I went in, believe it or not, with a singular focus to start another company, and this time, do it correctly. And of course, ended up on the opposite end of the spectrum of investment banking. And I spent my summer at Goldman. This was summer of 2008, as the world was falling apart. And Goldman was this like backup option of like, let me do this for another 2 years because I haven't really come up with an idea yet. And I'll meet some interesting people. I'll learn and expand a network. And of course, that became 5 years, as you pointed out, and was just an invaluable experience in my life, and the single-handedly the most defining experience of my career, and something I carry with me from a culture perspective and a work ethic perspective, and just a broad technical skills perspective. Ultimately, it was 2 or 3 jobs in those 5 years. It felt like 100-hour weeks. So just from a sheer quantity of work, I feel like I learned a lot from some amazing people. alongside. And so, yeah, I think, back to your question, I would say you go in with a very different mindset, and of course life is just never how you intend for it to work out, and I can now string it back together and say turned out to be pretty defining, but not for the reasons that I entered it. Really just helped me solidify and reset and recruit into an investment banking program that I probably otherwise wouldn't have had an opportunity to do so.
I think a lot of finance executives experience what you did in their early years. You shared with us as well that you stepped into a role where you had a wonderful CFO mentor. And I think that's what happens immediately after Goldman. It seems like you're having some good luck as you advanced. And you become CFO of that company. Is that right? Or can you share that chapter with us?
Yeah, sure. And so, yeah, from coming out of Goldman, I said, okay, like at the core of it, and this is back to my, roots as the son of an entrepreneur. Being an advisor was phenomenal. It was a great run, both on the consulting side prior to business school and then the investment banking side. And you get the sense that you get to meet a lot of CEOs, CFOs, give them advice, but ultimately they're going to make the call and deal with the consequences of that decision, right? And so you can look back and feel gratified about a decision you recommended to somebody, whether they did it or not. And for me, like I'm a tinkerer at heart, I'm an operator at heart, just grew up with that DNA. And so I just got the itch to go back into, just really going deep on a company. And so ended up at a company here in LA called The Honest Company. I started in a number 2 finance role there. Had an incredible mentor who really got me going in that number 2 role. He was a GE trained CFO, somebody who I'm in touch with to this day. Really gave me an amazing platform to learn in that number 2 role and get in front of the board and get in front of the rest of the management team. And ultimately, as transition happened at that company, the board asked me to take the CFO role on, and then work a sort of turnaround at the end of the day is what how I'd characterize it, with a new CEO, new management team in place. And I thought I was going to bridge it over to a new CEO, because usually new CEOs come with their own finance people, and they hired a guy named Nick Vlahos, who was COO of Clorox and was just an incredible mentor for me. And as I said at the outset, was a great coach and somebody who really would pull me aside after a meeting and say, hey, like XYZ thing you did in the meeting, excellent. Like I would do more of that and you just see the impact of it. And, this other thing that you did, like try not to do that. You were sitting with your arms crossed and your body language suggested you were close to that idea. Like just like tactical to strategic things that I had never been truly coached, right? That at that point hadn't appreciated what, a great boss should be, a real coach. And even if you're LeBron and you're, one of the greatest, or Kobe or whoever, like ultimately you need somebody that's going to be a coach to you, and have that outside perspective. And so had a great subsequent 3.5 year run. And he also gave me an incredible platform to learn and grow and do a variety of different things there. So just super grateful, the great luck of having some amazing people around me for the better part of my life and guiding, my work.
You're confident then the CFO office was going to be your place for some time. It wasn't as if you had aspirations to run off and do a startup again. You're going to step into another CFO role at a company that was somewhat mature. I'm just wondering if your entrepreneurial roots are behind you.
Yeah, I think when I was growing up, Jack, I used to think that, there's maybe naively so, that there's this path of like being a, CFO and driving the office of a CFO, or I could go be an entrepreneur and be a general manager, right? And increasingly, I think I've come to the conclusion over the last 8 years of having done this role that you can live a life of both of them combined, right? And so the jobs of a CFO, where you're doing much more sort of classic, FP&A and accounting, and that's where the lines start and stop, and that's your little box, and maybe IR and treasury gets thrown into it. And sure, you're strategic by definition because you've got a seat at the table. That's like really not that interesting of a job to me personally, and I don't think that that's the kind of CFO role that's going to be long-term successful. And so I've ultimately taken this perspective that all CFOs really should just have a general manager mindset. And again, this is one of those things that Nick was the first one. That's my old CEO, was one of the first people to say to me, like, look, I think you could be a great general manager, and let me sort of teach you how to go about doing that. He grew up a sales route, right? And I always thought, man, I'm not the guy on stage and rah-rahing people. Like, I just like the sort of backroom operations, and I want to silently drive, value or create value. And he was the one that ultimately showed me that you could be both, and you could do both of those things together. In fact, to be an effective and incredibly successful CFO, you should always have this general manager mindset. So yeah, I don't think the entrepreneurial bits are behind me. Like when I joined Relativity, we were 75, 80 people. We're about 1,200 people today. In those 4 years, I can share a ton of mistakes were made around systems and people and processes and how to scale stuff. But that bug stays with me for sure.
Well, that actually is a great segue because we want to ask you about Relativity Space. Tell us about this company. What does it do, and what is it about, really?
Yeah, sure. Happy to share. So, at the core of it, Relativity is just a next generation launch company. And so we're building a rocket that's about 40-50% larger than Falcon 9, which inarguably is the most successful commercial rocket that SpaceX has done. We're really going to take up satellites for customers up into orbit. We've done a smaller rocket, took it up to space, which was one of the most successful launches ever, first launches ever for anybody, and have built a multi-billion-dollar backlog of launch agreements. And we're working on a larger rocket that I mentioned that will launch in 2026 and quickly ramp from there. So have had the privilege of an amazing set of investors here across public company style investors and crossovers like the Fidelities and BlackRocks. We have a bunch of growth oriented venture capital firms. We've got a couple of sovereign wealth funds, some high profile individuals as well. And at the core of some of what we're building are also additive technology, so 3D printing and parts of the rocket that we're using. And so while rockets is the core business, we do have a few other things for the federal government and a few other use cases for using 3D printing to do large scale manufacturing. So lots of exciting stuff. It's at the absolute forefront of a mission orientation and technological advancements. And for me, like, I'm a lifelong learner, and that's what keeps me curious here. Like 4 years in, walking the floors, learning every single day from people on the floor here.
What is the real opportunity, though? Putting satellites up in space and all of what that entails. Why is this technology well suited to pursue that opportunity?
Yeah. Yeah, it's a great question. So, really, the way we think about it is there's obviously an existing terrestrial telco infrastructure today. That telco infrastructure is getting augmented by infrastructure in space. And so you're exactly right with satellites. So Starlink, for example, with what they've done and the wild growth that they've seen, Amazon's got publicly announced programs called Kuiper, where they're going to put up a constellation. And really, this is a what's called a low Earth orbit constellation. The way to think about it is, when you and I were growing up, this was, DirecTV, Dish Network. There was a satellite that was 2,500 kilometers away from Earth's orbit that was just really far out and was called a geostationary orbit, where the satellite on top of your house looks in a certain direction, and as the Earth rotates and spins, that's that one satellite that you're tied to out in space is exactly in the same location. What's happening now is about 500 kilometers from Earth's surface, you've got a mesh network really of satellites that then blanket the Earth and allow lots of different use cases around really what will be broadband speeds of internet. much faster than was possible in the old models. And so that is allowing lots of different use cases to bring the 2 or 3 billion people that are not connected in the world today to, of course, maritime and other airlines and transportation where we didn't have access to internet, certainly not in the same way. So that's sort of phase one of the augmentation of terrestrial telco. And then, of course, there's many other things that are happening outside around Moon and Mars and geopolitical tensions on the defense side. And so we are really just the company that wants to be that second provider to SpaceX in terms of providing access to space, and feel like there'll be a ton of things to take up and down over time for what's possible in space. And we're in super, super early innings of what we can achieve in space as, a human race.
You mentioned a number of the, I think, investors. Can you just give us maybe an abbreviated history of the company's capital structure?
Yeah, so the company had raised a couple hundred million from Playground, from Social Capital, and from Bond, that's Mary Meeker's fund, before I got here. So through a Series C financing. We did a Series D and an E in the prior sort of 3 years of me being here. And so we publicly announced, at least in my tenure, we've done another billion, 1 billion, 2 of equity capital raising in that time. And and I'll just sort of leave it at that. This is a business that we're always fundraising, and so that's what we've announced through a Series E at the moment on publicly announced fundraising.
So as it comes to your priorities, and again, did you arrive in 2020? Forgive me, I don't have it in front of me here.
Yeah.
2020. You arrived in 2020, just as the pandemic, I suppose, arrives. When you think about, all of what's been accomplished here, what you're working on now, what is this chapter about?
Yeah, I think I'd characterize it, Jack, as like the commercialization phase. And so prior to me getting here, the company was founded in 2016, and the first 4 years, there were really some big questions of, hey, is this even possible? Can it be done? Can it be done using this technology? I don't want to resort it to a quote unquote science experiment, but there were definitely a bunch of sort of technical risks that were not burnt down. I think within a year or two of being here, some of that risk started to get bought down in terms of the program and its maturity, and what was sort of left to prove. And ultimately, about a year and a few months ago now, we launched the rocket to space, and it was the furthest anyone's ever gotten on first try, which was remarkable by a lot of different measures. And so I'd say the last couple of years have been focused much more on, okay, well, what is the best product and the size of rocket to take up now that we've built a rocket, tested a rocket, launched a rocket successfully? How do we sort of take that and market and sell to customers who really need it in this phase? And what is the sort of ramp rate of the rocket that we're building that we want to focus on? And so I'd characterize it much more as like business model, pricing, commercialization, going from a couple hundred people even in the last couple of years to 1,200 people, transition of a workforce from very engineering heavy to real sort of corporate and business functions, to a technician workforce, and taking some of the work that we're doing and transitioning to sort of standards and SOPs and driving just a manufacturing operation, lots of large-scale infrastructure development around. We have a 1 million square foot facility here in Long Beach, so quite sizable. We've got hundreds of acres at NASA facilities in Stennis, Mississippi. We've got launch pads being developed at the moment at Cape Canaveral, at the Space Force Base there. So it's not a small operation in that regard anymore, and really putting in the controls and the infrastructure to drive a 1,200 person company going to thousands of people in the coming years, while still allowing for the innovation and flexibility of being quite nimble. Because if we try to build a perfect company right now, we'd never get to this big rocket, and we'd certainly never be able to ramp it, right? And at the same time, we don't want to build that rocket and ramp that rocket and say, oh, shoot, now we're able to do it. Now let's go put a company together because it'll be too late to go back and undo those things. So there's a real delicate balance in not stifling innovation, but also can't run a 1,200 person company, like we used to when we were 75, 80 people, and you could, get up and yell across the hallways and tell people to stop working on what they're working on and pivot, right? The cost of change and not having, communications done the right way, like it's just too great. And so, yeah, just trying to manage that and drive to the right sort of commercial outcomes.
When you consider your finance team and how you've structured it, and imagine you've looked into so many different types of companies, you know that how you've structured it, given the demands that this company currently has, how they want to use finance, where you're collaborating at a high level with certain functional areas, perhaps that other industries don't have to. I don't know. I'm trying to get a sense. Can you share with us what perhaps sets apart how you've structured finance in some way than from other industries?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. I think the biggest thing I'd say here um, is actually two things. One, the theme of what I was just talking about, which is this is a company where you want enough process so you can, drive accountability. Otherwise, we'd never, want to be able to hold anyone accountable. But I care a lot less whether we come within 5% of a budget. If the program is late by months or years and we saved a buck, that does us no good at the burn rates that we have. And vice versa. If we constantly think that way, to say, well, every day that goes by, we're going to burn, X dollars, then if everyone starts to buy sort of insurance along the way, then we'll never actually launch a rocket because we'll have overspent by a lot. And there's examples of both in our industry of companies that have failed because they tried to go too cheap and have no sense of accountability. And there's companies that have unlimited resources but have got nothing to space, in 20 years and spent billions and billions of dollars, right? So that's one sort of theme. The second theme is, in most places, you sort of put a product out and it worked a little bit better or a little bit worse than you thought. And then you look at your assumptions and you say, hey, we were wrong about this. We were right about that. Let's tweak, let's modify. Here are the drivers. We don't get a whole lot of signal back, right? Like, this is a program that will be multiple years with thousands of people. And so multi hundreds of thousands of labor hours that go into it. And it's like, and you really need to understand, well, how do you know that a dollar here is better than a dollar there? And how do I know that it's working? And so ultimately what that takes me to is we have a super lean finance team. I think most people would tell you a team of 30 people on the high end, plus or minus, between accounting and finance for a business that's 1,200 people is super lean. That is spending hundreds of millions of dollars a year. But this is a team that's just incredibly high EQ, right? Like, I'm looking to hire people that are fast learners, that can build deep relationships with technical folks that may actually, in most instances, don't come from technical backgrounds, but are just curious and they want to learn. And ultimately, my bar for this team is not, just making sure that they're included in design meetings, but that in some ways, engineers aren't starting meetings without their finance business partners in the room. That's when you've really, you're really adding value without inhibiting the work that someone's doing. Like, they want you side by side because you're always bringing this like real back to general manager mindset to the table, right, for your function that you're covering. And that's the kind of team that we have. And by the way, I'd say that's been my secret my whole life is, hire incredible people that attract other incredible people, work hard, but work incredibly productively and efficiently, like have fun along the way. And if I can do that successfully, then I can do my boss's job, or even better, I get to hang out with my three kids and maybe take an afternoon to go do something because I've got an incredible team in place doing great work, right? And that's the important stuff ultimately in life.
What? So I asked this question sort of this way. Three of those team members are down the hall in a conference room. These are your FP&A team, you swing open the door. What do they think Mo's going to ask them for?
Usually not much because I'm not asking for a whole lot of stuff live. They know my great thinking comes at like 5 o'clock in the morning. It's a barrage of emails, unfortunately. So, especially Jack, I would say in this like post-COVID world where even for a hardware business like ours, a lot of my teams are hybrid and will come in a couple of days a week, but I'm also running around where we don't get to interact the same way that I feel like, at least in my prior lives, I used to. Back at Goldman, you'd work 100 hours and you'd spend 98 of them with the same, 8 people in the same physical space. And so you knew what people ate and you knew their, marital arrangements and all kinds of details about their lives. I actually use that opportunity to, when I'm in person with people, to talk about food, talk about where they all did the happy hour or what they're into, and really like getting to know people at a level that unfortunately you can't over Zoom, right? And so that's usually what they'll find me doing in person, at least, is talking to them about their lives.
I want to touch on AI with you. Will AI be part of your competitive advantage? Is it already?
Yeah, I think it's sort of an inevitable reality. I think for most of us, at least in the next few years, if we're not incorporating it into our daily workflows, we'll be like the generation that's sort of like, "Oh, I don't know how to do this email thing, or I still work on the phone," right? And I think it'll come hit us that fast if it hasn't already in a lot of ways. So I can't say, I mean, there's some big, big, big visions from a finance function perspective on AI to say, hey, like, I don't need any systems anymore. I can just like ask a thing, like a bunch of questions, and we may not even need like a finance team. I don't think that'll ever be true. I think it'll be much more in how do we sort of wrap it in and augment and enhance the work that the humans are already doing in a lot of ways. There are technical pieces of our business where I do think actually AI will play a huge role. And I mean, our entire sort of technology stack rests on uh, designing for additive. And so if I could just say, hey, I need a large piece of metal doing XYZ properties, then maybe the computer just generatively designs this part and no human has to even design it. And I think there are areas there in the coming years that will see dramatic improvements in quality and the output of things that we produce. On the finance side, I think it'll be more an augmentation of the tools that we already have in place. I'm certainly using a couple of different tools on a daily basis on, crafting first outlines of things or taking a first cut or draft of stuff that I can then edit over. It's not replacing my work. It's definitively making it way faster on the things I need to produce in long form. I'm using it for things like comments that came back in a survey, an employee survey. And while someone could sit and parse through a bunch of it, you could dump it in and summarize themes in Chat GPT in like 30 seconds and come up with an action plan outside of all the scores that we do in an engagement survey. So many different use cases like that I think will enhance and hopefully normalize big company resource type things that small companies like us could now do.
Great. Thank you for that. We're going to jump to our finance strategic moment question, where we're just looking for one moment of insight that you've experienced along the way. Anything come to mind when we ask for a finance strategic moment?
Yeah, lots of things come to mind. Maybe I'll pick one from my early years working for Nick when I was a hot minded, fresh CFO, thinking about, hey, like this role is all about doing the right thing and having an opinion on all these things, right? And so there was a particular moment where, in the run up to many months of sort of conversations with our head of sales at the time and our head of marketing at the time, where I was just absolutely passionate about, quote unquote, my way and had just this lens and a singular focus, knowing, hey, like what I'm suggesting is like absolutely right and it's the right way, and almost sort of in hindsight, thinking that I was the smartest guy and I had all of the answers and all of that. And I remember, Nick pulling me aside, particularly after one fairly confrontational meeting where he just sat and observed, this management team talking, mostly me versus, our commercial folks, let's say, and sat down with me and said to me, hey, listen, I actually believe that what you're recommending is the right path, but I want you to also understand that no matter what you do and where you go in life, there will always be, XYZ person or type of person. And so the mastery isn't like telling people what to do. The mastery is going to come from influencing, folks and really like developing the empathy, because maybe you can take what you're saying and augment it with some of the stuff that was his and their recommendation, and you'll end up with 1+1 = 3. But don't ever be confused about the fact that there will always be this type of a person with this type of a mindset and this type of an agenda, and your role is much more, puppeteering the place to make it work. And that sounds very negative, and it's, not sort of intended with that connotation, but influence, I guess, is the way folks talk about it. But, that was sort of a turning point for me personally to say, hey, one, I got to develop a ton more empathy just as a human and listen, even if I, quote unquote, have the answer before I enter a meeting. And then two, I've got to figure out how to work with people that don't just look like me, right? Because feel like me. Because most of my life in professional services, everybody was on a single deal team. You sort of were cut from the same cloth, and you show up to an operating role, and you've got somebody who worked at Disney, or she worked at a small company or a big company, and it's how do you sort of amalgamate these experiences and ultimately, as I said, make 1+1 = 3. And if I didn't genuinely absorb the things someone was saying to me across the table and develop the empathy for their perspective, then I was missing out. And I was never going to work in a homogenous place to look for a bunch of me's. That would be a bad idea, and we would never actually run a successful company. So I think it's just one of those things where, again, back to an earlier conversation we had about this, like around finding the right coach and the right mentor that I could look up to and respect, and who could give me that sort of real-time feedback in a way that I could absorb it, versus becoming super defensive and saying, no, you're wrong about it. And me to have a lens to say, hey, I want to be a better person. And so anyway, I carry that with me almost in all kinds of settings to this day, to say, let me really understand where this person's coming from, or this young engineer is coming from, and why are they saying what they're saying, and what motivations could they have, and have I really thought through the things that they're thinking through, even if I, on surface, made my decision. So anyway, that's one of my many that come to mind.
$37,025.1. These are the three numbers to remember to get the visibility and control you need to make the right business decisions instantly. 37,000. That's the number of businesses which have upgraded to NetSuite by Oracle. NetSuite is the #1 cloud financial system, streamlining accounting, financial management, inventory, HR, and more. 25. NetSuite turns 25 this year. That's 25 years of helping businesses do more with less, close their books in days, not weeks, and drive down expenses. 1. Because your business is one of a kind, you should get a customized solution for all of your KPIs in one efficient system and with one source of truth. Manage risk, get reliable forecasts, and improve margins. Everything you need, all in one place. Right now, download NetSuite's popular KPI checklist designed to give you consistently excellent performance, absolutely free, at netsuite.com/KPI. That's netsuite.com/KPI.
Future finance leaders, we want you to think back to the first time, though, that you stepped into the CFO role, and it was back at your earlier tour of duty. But when you stepped into that role, was there just something that you wish you knew more about, as a new CFO? What was that one thing that you wish someone had told you? Anything come to mind?
Yeah, Jack, I would say that the parts of the job, at least the CFO job, that are documented and well documented, were not much of a surprise. Like, I definitely feel like I had some imposter syndrome, being like, oh man, I got put in this like spot, and they all think that I know how to do this, but I like really don't. And as it sort of turns out, the CFO job, at least the classic bits of it, is not rocket science. No pun intended. The parts that I wish someone had sat me down and told me was, hey, as the CFO, your job is to sort of be the glue of that management team, and therefore, whether it's large or small or high growth or turnaround, and I've seen a number of all of those scenarios, that there's always going to be sort of people drama, and that's true of how you manage and glue the board to the management team, and including your CEO or founder, or how you glue the founder to the rest of the management team, and how do you sort of play that glue amongst the peers and maybe even one level down. And I probably spend 20 to 30% these days. I have formal responsibilities for the HR teams, but even outside of that, and even certainly prior to that, I spent an exhausting amount of time on people matters. That's certainly senior people matters. And for a while, I kept thinking, man, like I just want to do my CFO job. Like, when am I going to get out of this drama? And I have now absorbed it and understood it, that actually it's not drama, and it's a part of sort of trying to build a high performing team. And how you go about doing that is a core part of the CFO job. For the basics of the CFO role, it's great to hire a great controller and have an amazing VP finance or number two finance person, and maybe there's an IR person or so in the mix. But that's ultimately the day-to-day stuff, which you shouldn't have to spend so much time on, and one's role should actually be focused heavily on some of those other elements that I was talking about. So that's the one thing I completely underappreciated for the first several years of my first CFO gig.
We always like to ask our guests to reflect a little on the personal side. Is there something most people generally don't know about you? Something some interest you have, some experience that you had? Don't know. Anything come to mind?
I'm pretty much an open book. I think hopefully the reputation I carry is of high integrity, and no matter what I've done in my life, even the people I've parted ways with over the years, I'm very close to and remain friends with at a personal level. Um, I guess, yeah. I mean, the and maybe some people that are close to me know this, but I am a lifelong learner. Like I live for experiences, and so I'm a voracious reader, and I love to just like be in places and see things that otherwise I would have not experienced in my life. I will sit with friends of mine that have PhDs, and I'll want to like understand their dissertations, and at length, and it sort of irks my wife at a dinner amongst friends. But I'm just a sucker for people's passions, and this is why I think this job, this company has been so amazing, because rocket folks have a lot of passions, and certainly it's super technical, and so I can pretty much sit in any conversation and be like, well, tell me about the engine and why and what's happening here. And I love it. I like, love learning, and I want to be super curious. And so that's, yeah.
Can we ask you about to go way back for us and just that entrepreneurial startup way back when, the yellow number? Just in a nutshell, I mean, what were you up to? Do you still believe in the concept? Maybe you succeeded. Maybe it had a wonderful exit. I don't know, but and just the abbreviated history there.
Yeah, so it was a mobile advertising company about a year before the iPhone was released, and we had this hunch that, hey, maybe using phones you could. This wasn't a word at the time, but geo target people, and so if you walked by certain cell towers, the it was SMS only because it wasn't really that focused on smartphone capabilities in the way we understand it today, that maybe we'd send you a text message with an offer and things like that. And so the business I ended up selling to my partner, who actually still runs it and does mobile advertising for the likes of a Coca-Cola, and I have had zero to do with it in 20 years, and he's very successful with it, and it's phenomenal. And so I think we'd agree that we all believe in mobile advertising at this point. Maybe I sold too early and didn't give it enough, but it was, creepy stuff at the time. It was like, I don't know if I could tie my life to like geo-targeting people as they walk by a cell tower, like, and SMS couponing them, right? But turned out to be pretty big. And look, I'm glad for all the experiences I've had in my life to date, and live my life in the woulda, coulda, shoulda. So here we are.
Excellent. Well, thank you for that. Would you have a book selection for us?
Book selection. So mine would be all sort of fiction oriented, because I spend so much time reading non-fiction at work that most of my stuff is just sort of being lost in the world of fiction. So it's perhaps not as interesting. Maybe on the fiction side, the one thing I would recommend, maybe two things. One is the Phil Knight biography, Shoe Dog. If people haven't read it, I think a lot of the themes that I'm talking about on being on the brink and having this ownership mentality, and I found fascinating in the way it was described. And the early days of Nike was super fascinating. The other book, it's a little sounds a little dry, but actually is super fascinating. Is a book called The Checklist Manifesto by I believe it's Dr. Atul Gawande, who writes about the simplicity of like living your life with checklists and the simple value that you get out of it. I'm a huge checklist guy and get great gratification from checking things off on my list, and has helped me stay organized on personal and professional things. But those would be the two that come to mind that are outside my fiction reading world.
Well, thank you for those. We're going to move to our final question, where we're going to ask you to look forward finally. And what we'd like to know are your priorities as a CFO for the next 12 months. What would those priorities be?
Yeah, I think in a business that requires capital, my 1, 2, and 3 priorities are always going to be fundraising, and having us a strong balance sheet so we can resource this business as we go. In particular for us, we are in a transition mode from really taking designs and the prototype rocket that we had to getting a manufacturing machine, going, and all of the infrastructure that's associated with it. And so really the analogy that I would have is taking a train that one would have just built or are building still, and starting to lay it onto tracks and making sure that it doesn't sort of set off on the wrong, track, if you will. And so really making sure that I'm plugged in and connected to the realities on the ground and on the floor and walking around and keeping informed. That's going to be key as we make this transition from a concept over the years to like a manufacturing at scale with a high ramp rate. Those would be the big areas of focus for me personally.
Shahzad, we wish we could ask you a dozen more questions. Thank you for some thoughtful answers to our questions today.
Thank you so much for having me, Jack.
Hello, listeners. As you may know, we recently passed the 1,000 episode milestone. And the fact is, we've published well over 1,000 episodes over the years, but we only prescribe a number to episodes featuring CFOs because we know this is truly what has distinguished us over time. We're a platform dedicated to the people who actually occupy the CFO office. And to you, our listeners, who are very often seeking to better understand the roots of finance leadership. Well, it's with this in mind that we're pleased to announce the release of our new book titled The CFO 500, where we have profiled 500 of the more than 1,000 CFOs that have participated with us over the years. And you remember Siskel and Ebert, the movie guide? Leonard Moulton had his movie guide as well. Well, that's sort of the concept of what's inspired this volume, the CFO 500. Think of it as a reference volume where you can quickly thumb through the 500 one-page CFO profiles and cherry pick out the interviews that matter to you. How so? Well, each CFO page profile includes an individual QR code that allows you to instantly access the audio interview with the CFO that most intrigues you. Or maybe it's a particular industry. Just like that movie guide you used to reach to on a day when nothing much was going on, here's a way to quickly reference the interviews that matter most to you. The CFO 500 is now available for $29.95 and can only be purchased via CFOThoughtLeader.com. So visit us at CFOThoughtLeader.com. Thank you.